Prime Minister Mark Carney, meantime, now in Mexico on a big trade trip in the face of Donald Trump's trade war against Canada and Mexico as well.
Mark Carney landed in Mexico City with cameras flashing, determined to show leadership in the middle of Donald Trump's tariff storm. Ottawa framed it as a whirlwind trade mission, just 36 hours long, but the timing said everything. Trump is preparing to reopen the North American Trade Pact, and instead of confronting Washington directly, Carney chose to look for cover in Mexico. For Canadians watching from home, the spectacle was jarring. At the very moment when livelihoods are threatened by steel, aluminum, and auto tariffs, their prime minister was trying to stage a partnership that risks being seen as a side deal. What was sold as diplomacy could just as easily be read as desperation. In Mexico City, Carney rushed to sign what he called a strategic partnership with President Claudia Sheinbaum. The agreement touched everything from trade and agriculture to health, infrastructure, and security. On the surface, it looked like a bold expansion of Canada's role in the continent. In reality, it was a fragile attempt to spread risk. Mexico, battered by Trump's pressure at the border and tariffs on its exports, is also seeking allies. Carney hoped to present Canada as a co-pilot in this balancing act. But for Canadian workers back home, the promises feel hollow. The factories are already slowing. The unemployment lines are already growing. A piece of paper in Mexico City will not change the fact that the United States still controls the levers of the game. Critics warn that Canada's reliance on U.S. markets cannot be offset by symbolic visits or new memorandums. With most trades still flowing south, Carney's talk of diversification makes Ottawa look weaker in Washington and overstretched in Mexico. The danger in Carney's maneuver is obvious. Even political analysts caution that Washington could easily see the Mexico visit as a move behind Trump's back. That perception alone is enough to turn a photo op into a liability. If the success of the trip depends on managing how it looks to the White House, then the gamble is already clear. While Washington prepares to reopen USMCA talks, Canada and Mexico huddle together in private. Trump has never hesitated to seize on optics as justification for harsher measures. By choosing this moment for a partnership show, Carney risks feeding the very narrative Trump thrives on, that Canada is avoiding confrontation and looking for shortcuts. What he frames as relationship building could just as easily be read in Washington as weakness. If Trump chooses to hit back, the consequences for Canada will be brutal. More tariffs on metals or autos could push an already fragile economy into deeper recession. Job losses are mounting, with tens of thousands gone in manufacturing and unemployment now at its highest level in nearly a decade. Families see prices climbing while paychecks shrink. At a time when every signal demanded focus on Washington, Carney chose to chase headlines abroad. Instead of strength, Canada may end up with less leverage in the USMCA review of 2026. Mexico can pivot south or toward Asia. Canada has nowhere to run. This is why so many observers call the Mexico gambit a high-risk play. It may soothe political optics for a day, but it leaves Canada exposed to retaliation and offers no shield for workers losing their jobs. If Trump doubles down, Canadians will pay again. And once more, they will be told to be patient while their leader boards another plane in search of another photo op. The question hangs heavy. Was this trip a clever strategy to broaden ties, or another misstep that backfires, leaving Canadians to pay the price while Trump tightens his grip on the continent's trade rules? For many, the answer is already clear.
With respect to Churchill, what's interesting about Churchill, there is much more to it than Contrecoeur in terms of what it potentially unlocks. So it unlocks, as you just said, LNG. It potentially unlocks pathways for critical minerals and links into Europe.
Carney just got another painful reminder that Donald Trump sets the terms. What was supposed to be Canada's grand diversification plan has turned into a scramble that looks weaker by the day. Ottawa promised strength, but Trump's tariffs have exposed how fragile the Canadian economy really is. Donald Trump never hit his strategy. He raised tariffs on Canadian exports outside CUSMA and dared Ottawa to fight back. The message was blunt. The U.S. can live without Canada, but can Canada live without the U.S.? Carney's answer was to pivot fast, telling Canadians that Europe and Asia would replace lost ground. But instead of confidence, that move revealed desperation. Canada is still locked into high costs at home, while Trump controls the pressure points. The result is clear. Washington dictates the pace, and Ottawa is left reacting. Carney held up energy projects as proof that Canada could stand tall. He pointed to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, a $34 billion megaproject. Yes, some shipments have shifted toward Asia, but Canadians are footing the bill. Taxpayers financed the line, and only now is it showing limited returns. Each Aframax tanker leaving British Columbia sails at just 70 or 80% capacity because of depth limits. That inefficiency means higher costs that industry will pass down to families already struggling with inflation. Then came the promise of Churchill Port in Manitoba. Carney called it one of the first big infrastructure projects for LNG and critical minerals. But right now, it is still a plan on paper, years away from operation, demanding billions more in investment. The port will require dredging, new rail links, and long construction timelines. By the time it opens, Trump could have torn up trade frameworks twice over. Meanwhile, steel and aluminum workers see no relief. Lumber towns are still shrinking. Auto suppliers face order cuts. For them, the diversification plan sounds like an empty slogan, not a solution. Trump's tariffs may look aggressive, but they serve a clear purpose: bring production back to the United States and make partners pay for access. Canada's response has been to push exports into Europe and Asia, but that only puts Ottawa into direct competition with Washington. In Europe, Trump locked in a 15% tariff cap after threatening higher levels. Canada, by contrast, shows up with half-ready projects and political promises. In Asia, demand for LNG and oil is rising, but Japanese and Korean buyers already signed long-term deals with American suppliers. Canada is late to the table, offering capacity that is still tied up in costly projects. Even the technical fixes, dredging in Bird Inlet or optimizing pipelines, highlight how far behind Canada is. Trump plays offense, delivering contracts today, while Carney is still drawing maps on paper. Every time Ottawa talks about strategic patience, it only highlights the gap between Trump's execution and Canada's hesitation. The real losers are not in Washington, they are in Canada. Workers in steel plants, aluminum smelters, auto factories, and sawmills are still waiting for relief. Prices for construction materials, cars, and even household goods are rising. Taxpayers who financed megaprojects now face the reality that returns are slow, uncertain, and overshadowed by higher living costs. Trump's approach may be ruthless, but it is effective. He sets the rules of trade, and every Canadian backfire proves the point. Carney wanted to show strength abroad, but at home, his strategy leaves families squeezed and industries exposed. Trump's tariffs were designed to force Canada into submission, and Carney's diversification gamble has not changed that balance. Instead of breaking free, Canada now faces a harsher reality: billions spent on infrastructure, markets still out of reach, and a U.S. president who refuses to back down. This is not stability. It is a warning sign. For Canadians, the pain is already real, and the worst may still be ahead.
That's what they could do. And I think everyone else should do the same thing. Start supporting companies that make whiskey here by Ontario people. That's what we need to do, is support each other.
Another Canadian town is paying the price. Diageo, the parent company of Crown Royal, confirmed it will close its Amherstburg bottling plant in February. That means 160 jobs gone, families left scrambling, and a community stripped of its largest employer. The official explanation was efficiency, moving production closer to U.S. consumers. But the truth is obvious. Trump's tariff war created the climate. Companies now calculate it's cheaper to abandon Ontario than to keep producing under uncertainty.
Well, another blow to a region near the Canada-U.S. border. Windsor is already on tenterhooks with the auto industry and Donald Trump's tariff crosshairs. Bottles Crown Royal, an iconic Canadian whiskey with a storied history, is closing and shifting work to south of the border.
For Washington, this is leverage. For Ottawa, it's another humiliation. Trump promised tariffs would bring jobs back to America, and in this case, he got what he wanted: Canadian jobs pulled south of the border. Ontario Premier Doug Ford tried to turn anger into resistance. In front of cameras, he poured out a bottle of Crown Royal. It was emotional, dramatic, and easy to broadcast, but for all the headlines, the protest solved nothing. Ford positioned himself as the loud voice against Trump's tariffs, yet his act only highlighted how powerless Canada has become. The jobs are still leaving, the plant is still closing, and the reality is that no whiskey stunt can reverse the damage of Trump's trade war. The deeper problem is that Ford is shouting from the sidelines. He has no seat at the negotiating table, no power to stop the tariffs, and no leverage to force Trump's hand. His protest gave Canadians a moment of catharsis, but it also revealed that provincial leaders can only vent frustration while real decisions are dictated from Washington. To Trump, Ford's theatrics were proof that Canada is struggling to respond in any meaningful way. After Ford's protest, lawmakers in Ontario called for a boycott of Crown Royal. They wanted the brand pulled from liquor store shelves, just as American whiskey was removed earlier this year. The idea was to strike back with consumer power. But here's the problem. Diageo still employs more than 500 Canadians at other facilities in Quebec and Manitoba. Company figures show nearly 10,000 jobs in Canada are tied to Crown Royal's supply chain, and 80% of the grains, rye, corn, barley, come from Canadian farmers, especially in Manitoba. A boycott doesn't punish Trump, it punishes Canadians. That is the trap. Ottawa talks tough, Ford makes noise, but the practical consequences keep landing on Canadian workers and farmers. Trump plays offense, Canada keeps hurting itself. The bigger picture is even worse. At the very moment Crown Royal was closing shop, a U.S. federal appeals court ruled most of Trump's tariff program unlawful. Yet Trump is charging ahead, taking the case to the Supreme Court, showing he won't back down. And where is Canada? Prime Minister Mark Carney calls it strategic patience. In reality, it looks like paralysis. No major win, no breakthrough deal, just communities like Amherstburg losing jobs while Ottawa insists Canada still has the best trade arrangement. The truth is Canada's so-called patience is nothing more than delay. Carney is buying time while Trump dictates the pace. Businesses are moving south, workers are losing paychecks, and provinces are forced into symbolic protests. Every week Canada waits, Trump tightens the screws. The strategy may look calm in Ottawa, but on the ground it feels like surrender. Trump set the terms of this fight. Canada reacted late and divided. Ford's whiskey protest became a symbol not of strength but of frustration. Carney's government, meanwhile, clings to diplomacy while people watch jobs vanish. The lesson is clear. Trump's tariffs are working as pressure. Canada's response is backfiring, and unless Ottawa changes course, more towns will face the same fate as Amherstburg.
Increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
Tariffs, we know fully it's going to impact workers on both sides of the borders. Trump has basically thrown our supply system and economies into chaos.
Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs strike at the heart of Canada's industry, and Carney opened the door for Washington by pulling back retaliation. These metals are not minor commodities. They are the backbone of Canadian manufacturing, feeding auto plants in Ontario, aerospace in Quebec, and infrastructure projects nationwide. For months, Ottawa promised to stand firm. Then, Carney shifted course.
A wide swath of Canada's retaliatory tariffs slapped on U.S. goods will be eliminated. But the Prime Minister says those on steel, aluminum, and autos will remain.
His government removed most counter tariffs on U.S. goods, while keeping only steel, aluminum, and autos under retaliation. He called it strategic patience, but to Canadians, it looked like retreat. Washington quickly labeled the move constructive. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc was hosted in Washington by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick for a 90-minute session. It was cordial, even described as productive, yet it produced no concrete concessions. Prices at home continued climbing. Workers saw no relief. Trump still controlled the pace, while Canada waited for outcomes that never came. By narrowing retaliation, Ottawa showed it was willing to absorb punishment while hoping for movement from Washington that remained elusive. With no breakthrough in the U.S. capital, Carney turned to Europe. He stood beside leaders in Berlin, Warsaw, and Riga, promising submarine contracts, critical mineral partnerships, and an expanded military presence in Latvia. The images played well on television, but at home, the crisis was plain. Steel and aluminum tariffs choking Canadian industries. Europe may one day buy more Canadian exports, but long-term promises do not pay today's bills. Even conservative commentators pointed out the gap. Activity is not achievement. Summits and declarations may fill schedules, but they do not cover mortgage payments in Hamilton. They do not save shifts in Sault Ste. Marie, and they do not keep smelters alive in Saguenay. Trump sees this clearly. Each handshake in Europe signals to him that Ottawa is chasing optics, while the real fight remains unresolved. For Trump, that means Canada is drifting, not defending.
Since steel tariffs between Canada and the US came into effect, this Quebec food can maker has seen its sales more than double.
The economic toll is already visible. In Quebec, the food can sector has suddenly become a lifeline because American inputs are too expensive. A new plant in Windsor is expected to create more than 100 jobs and produce 1.2 billion cans a year by 2028. But experts warn the payback period for such investments can stretch 8 to 10 years.
Building a plant is always a challenge because you have to know what will be the payback period for your investment, and so usually payback periods are at least 8 to 10 years.
That does little for workers who need stability now. Ontario's auto sector faces higher costs for steel frames and aluminum parts, squeezing every step from stamping to assembly. Municipalities are struggling to replace essential equipment. Reports highlight fire trucks built with U.S. steel that now cost millions more and take years to deliver. Statistics Canada notes Windsor unemployment remains above 10%, among the highest in Canada. Quebec's aluminum producers warn about layoffs if tariffs persist. These are not abstract numbers. They are paychecks, mortgages, and grocery bills. Add a weakened Canadian dollar, and the burden grows heavier. Families feel the squeeze each month, while Ottawa insists on patience. Donald Trump thrives on unpredictability. One day he praises Carney as a friend, the next he threatens to tighten the screws further. By pulling back most counter tariffs while keeping only a narrow list, Carney handed him the advantage. Ottawa claims Canada still holds many cards, but the first card played was retreat, and that message matters. It tells Trump that Canada will endure economic pain without forcing concessions in return. Steel and aluminum were supposed to be pillars of the Canadian economy. Instead, they remain in the crosshairs, bleeding under tariffs, while Carney preaches strategic patience. The result is higher costs, anxious workers, and industries in limbo. Trump can already claim victory without lifting a finger. For Canadians, that means heavier bills, fewer jobs, and more uncertainty. And the harsh reality is this: if Ottawa calls this patience, then the battle still ahead could be far more punishing.
We're announcing today that we're acting to protect Canada's agriculture and seafood industries. I'm going to focus on Canadian canola, which has been hit with Chinese tariffs.
And certainly pleased to have some supports from the federal government, but on balance, I would have to say that most of what was announced misses the mark in terms of the support that the canola industry needs right now.
Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped in front of the cameras with bold words and billion-dollar promises. His government unveiled what he called a shield for Canada's economy, a sweeping package meant to protect workers, businesses, and farmers from Trump's tariffs. Ottawa framed it as nothing less than a new beginning, a plan to turn disruption into opportunity. But behind the speeches and headlines, the cracks are already showing. Canada is still losing jobs, supply chains remain fractured, and the sectors most exposed to foreign tariffs are warning that nothing has fundamentally improved. Carney may have promised resilience, yet for many Canadians, the reality is higher costs, more uncertainty, and fewer options. The big question is whether this package is a genuine solution or just another political show while the country's economy bleeds. Carney's plan was designed to impress: a Buy Canadian mandate to lock in domestic suppliers, a $5 billion strategic response fund to help steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber, a reskilling program for 50,000 workers, a pause on the federal electric vehicle mandate to ease pressure on automakers hit with a 25% U.S. tariff, and $370 million for canola farmers to shift crops into biofuels. On paper, it looks comprehensive. In practice, the flaws are glaring. Much of the support depends on loans and credit expansions, piling debt on sectors already struggling. The Canola Council of Canada said plainly that the measures miss the mark. Farmers cannot borrow their way out of a market collapse. China remains closed to Canadian canola, and processors with massive infrastructure are left without targeted support. What was pitched as a shield feels more like a patchwork, offering headlines instead of solutions. The reality is that Canada is being squeezed from two directions at once. Washington has imposed a 35% tariff on goods outside USMCA and singled out the auto sector with a 25% hit. At the same time, Beijing retaliated against Canada by slapping duties on canola oil and meal, cutting into the nation's biggest agricultural export. Small manufacturers are drowning as duty-free exemptions on low-value shipments vanish, driving up costs on everyday parts and supplies. Auto sales have weakened, with electric vehicle demand plunging by 35% in June, and pausing the EV mandate has done little to restore confidence. Businesses are shrinking shifts, some are closing entirely, and farmers are openly questioning how long they can hold on. Canada finds itself cornered, paying the price for policies that sound ambitious but fail to stop the bleeding. Trump's tariff campaign was designed to force allies into concessions, and Canada has not escaped. Instead of relief, Carney's policies have revealed just how vulnerable the country remains. Ottawa talks about shifting from reliance to resilience, but what Canadians are experiencing is more debt, more layoffs, and fewer markets abroad. China has not lifted its restrictions, Trump shows no sign of easing pressure, and Ottawa's measures have not fixed the fundamentals. The Canola Council has warned that these programs do not solve the crisis, and everyday Canadians are left to carry the burden. For all the promises of transformation, Carney's shield looks hollow. The government may claim progress, but the scoreboard tells another story. Canada is exposed, industries are in retreat, and it is the Canadian worker and farmer who are paying the real price.
Interfor announced that from September to December, they will reduce lumber production in North America.
It's unknown what this means for each location, but union officials say we need a trade deal with the U.S. before the slowdowns become the norm.
Canada's lumber industry has just been hit with a blow that it cannot hide. Interfor, one of the largest forestry companies in North America, announced it will slash 145 million board feet of production between September and December. That is roughly 12% of its normal output. Mills from Sault Ste. Marie to Elk Lake in Ontario are already slowing down. For workers on the ground, it means reduced shifts, prolonged layoffs, and families forced to depend on unemployment insurance. This is not just a business adjustment, it is the symptom of a deeper crisis. Ottawa promised stability, but instead, Canada finds itself cornered. The country has failed to reach a trade deal with Washington, and the tariffs that were supposed to pressure the United States are breaking Canada's backbone first.
The reason behind this crisis is no secret. At the end of July, the U.S. Department of Commerce finalized anti-dumping and countervailing duties on Canadian softwood lumber. Rates now climb as high as 34% for many producers. These duties went into effect in late July and mid-August, and the consequences have been immediate. Yet instead of moving swiftly to negotiate relief, Prime Minister Mark Carney chose the path of delay. Ottawa leaned on lawsuits and trade panels, waiting for WTO or USMCA rulings that could take years. The result is that Canadian producers see no reason to keep exporting at full tilt. For them, every shipment south of the border bleeds money. So the rational choice was to cut back production, idle workers, and hope for a better day. The workers of Sault Ste. Marie are paying the price. A third of them were forced onto rotating schedules, collecting employment insurance instead of steady pay. What Ottawa calls strategic patience looks in practice like chaos in local communities.
Carney's defenders insist this is a long game, but the evidence says otherwise. Canada exports the vast majority of its lumber to the United States. Without access to that market, there is no immediate alternative. Meanwhile, American builders still have domestic producers and other suppliers to draw from. The imbalance is clear. Canada bleeds jobs first. The futures market reflected the turmoil. After months of weakness, prices bounced as soon as Interfor announced its cuts. But this rebound did not rescue Canadian workers. It simply made construction costs in both countries more volatile. Ottawa had hoped to put Trump under pressure. Instead, Canada is the one cracking under strain. This is the true backfire. Ottawa's slow and cautious strategy was supposed to shield Canada, but it left the lumber sector exposed. Mills are slowing, workers are anxious, and provinces that depend on forestry are bracing for more losses.
Interfor's cutback is not an isolated event. It is a warning sign of what happens when a government refuses to act decisively. Carney's failure to secure a deal with the United States has turned tariffs into a weapon against Canada itself. $1 billion of promised federal support cannot replace the lost contracts and steady paychecks. If Washington extends its duties beyond lumber to pulp, paper, or engineered wood products, the damage will escalate. What began as a tariff fight could spiral into a collapse of Canada's forestry base. Trump's tariffs may have been designed to pressure Canada, but it is Carney's hesitation, his refusal to secure real concessions, that has left Canada exposed. The backfire is undeniable. The industry is shrinking, jobs are vanishing, and Canadians are the ones left carrying the cost.
I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. Elbows up, me too. It was an anti-American campaign.
The cabinet's now saying that we're at war with America. That doesn't help.
The stage was Halifax, and the blow came not from Ottawa, but from Washington's own envoy. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra looked straight at Canada's political class and told them the truth they did not want to hear. This is not a trade war. It is negotiation. The so-called conflict with America is nothing more than a script, a drama staged for domestic applause. Hoekstra warned that calling it war was misleading, even dangerous, because if President Trump truly considered Canada an enemy, the reality would look far harsher. And then came the deeper sting. He admitted it was difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the relationship anymore. The very passion that built prosperity on both sides of the border has withered. For Mark Carney, who once rallied voters with his elbows-up bravado, it was a direct humiliation. The mask slipped, and Washington exposed the emptiness of his narrative. As Hoekstra delivered that critique, Ottawa was already burning from within. Finance veteran Chrystia Freeland walked out of cabinet on the eve of the fall economic statement. No press conference, no defense, just a quiet resignation that revealed how fractured Carney's government had become. What was left was a weakened prime minister clinging to anti-American theatrics while losing his own team. For ordinary Canadians, the stagecraft offers no relief. Inflation eats into paychecks, job losses pile up, and small businesses drown in uncertainty. Instead of concrete policy, the government pushes boycott campaigns against American travel and goods. But these gestures backfire. Families cancel trips, airlines slash routes, retailers strip shelves, and it is the Canadian consumer who pays the cost. Carney promised toughness. What he delivered was self-inflicted pain. Every misstep is dressed up as patriotism, but the outcome is the same: a poorer, more divided country where anger substitutes for leadership. Hoekstra's message cut through the noise. He reminded Canadians that business leaders still believe in the partnership because it created prosperity, high-quality jobs, and supply chains that work. Yet Ottawa prefers to play politics. Under Carney, the relationship with America is treated not as an economic lifeline, but as a rhetorical weapon. The results speak for themselves. Exports to the U.S. dip by billions, while shipments to Europe scramble to fill the gap. Cross-border car trips fall by a third, air travel plunges by a quarter, and shelves once stocked with American brands are now empty. Loblaw alone has swapped in more than 100 domestic suppliers just to meet nationalist demand. To some politicians, this looks like strength. To workers and shop owners, it feels like survival under siege. Carney insists Canada is at war. The numbers show Canada is bleeding. And in the silence of those statistics, you hear the real verdict: a government more concerned with symbols than with solutions. The contrast could not be sharper. Trump's America pursues reciprocal tariffs with clarity. Negotiate hard, protect workers, secure deals. It is discipline, not drama. Carney's Canada, by comparison, looks adrift, confusing performance for policy. Every time the Prime Minister lashes out, he reveals weakness. Every time his ministers resign or dodge responsibility, the sense of collapse grows. The ambassador's words landed because they carried the weight of reality. Canada is not winning this standoff. It is isolating itself while the United States continues to dictate the terms of trade. For Canadians, the cost is higher prices, fewer jobs, and a government that confuses slogans with solutions. The warning is clear. Canada is sliding deeper into crisis, while Trump's America walks away stronger, holding the reins of the game board.